This is a screencast on Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat, and we talked already about Poe and dark romanticism or the American Gothic. We talked about how he was continually exploring the monsters that live within people, insanity and darkness within. It was kind of like his forte, and so this is no exception to that concept. The story starts off pretty kind of. We can tell it's gonna be a flashback. He talks about the story that he's about to tell, and he assures the reader that he doesn't expect anybody to believe the story. He says, "Mad indeed would I be to expect it in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad I am not, and very surely I do not dream. I'm not crazy. I didn't dream this up. It really happened." And so the purpose behind this, he needs to kind of get the story off of his chest. He says that, but tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. So it kind of foreshadows the end, and he's going to go back and tell this story. So he needs to start off by talking about, in the beginning, when he was a child, that he was noted for his docility and his humanity. He was kind at heart. He loved animals. His parents gave him lots of pets. He spent a lot of time and was really happy when he was feeding them and petting them. And he grows up with this love of animals. It's almost like he's trying to assure us that, at one point in time, this was who he was. It was part of his nature. It was very gentle. And he says there is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to the heart of him who has frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. And so he grows up. He gets married pretty young to a woman who was like him. She was a had a gentle disposition. She loved animals, and they had a collection of animals at their home: birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. One thing that I want to point out, and it's just something that makes you a better reader. Good readers pay attention to words that are set off in different fonts or different text, italicized, bolded. Any kind of time an author makes a choice like that, it's something worth paying attention to. And so it's notable here that the cat is set off from the other animals in italics. So good readers pay attention to that. They always serve some kind of purpose. Okay? So he goes on to talk about the cat. In kind of a reverence kind of way. He talks about it being beautiful. It was very intelligent. It was entirely black, and that this cat, he actually was BFFs. They were best of friends. But then he starts drinking, and a lot. And so every day that he is drinking, he is undergoing a radical alteration. He says, "I grew day by day more moody, more irritable, more regardless for the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence." So he's drinking. At first, he starts off just kind of being a jerk. Then he starts using language, and then he starts beating anything that comes in his path. The pets, also the same. He starts to neglect them and then beats them as well. But the cat, his favorite, he is not hurting, not mistreating him in any way. He says that he made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog. But the longer he drank, the more the cat began to experience the effects of his temper. So one night he comes home, he's very drunk, and he imagines that the cat is avoiding him, and this just cannot be borne. So he snatches the cat up, and the cat, obviously, I don't know if you've ever snatched a cat up, but if you scare it, snatch a cat up, it's going to react, either claw you or bite you. And this is exactly what Pluto does. Bites his hand. And he says, the fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence, gin-nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. So he takes a penknife out of his pocket, opens it up, grasps the poor beast by the throat, and cuts out one of its eyes. And so obviously that's very alarming to us as the reader. But it doesn't stop there. At first he feels, I won't even say maybe a little ashamed. He says that as I say this, I blush, I burn, I shudder while I write this down. Like I'm kind of ashamed at what I did. So he sleeps off the drunk. He wakes up the next morning, and he looks at the cat, and he is afraid of what he's done. He feels a little bit of remorse, but his soul is not touched by it. So it's not a guilt kind of thing. He feels a little sad. I feel kind of bad that I did that. But the remorse that someone should feel, like the horrible feeling of guilt, is not there. Okay? So the cat, yes ma'am, better. It recovers. The socket grows up, and of course it's a little startling to see the cat with no eyeball in one of its sockets. But he goes about the house as usual, except for one thing. Except anytime that old dude is in the room, the cat is avoiding or evasive, and this makes him so angry. I don't know why he would think the cat would be okay with him after this happened, but it grows on him. It grows this feeling, and he calls it the spirit of perverseness. And there you see we have it in all capital letters, so paying attention to that is important. And so he says, who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or a silly action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? Who hasn't done this, right? What guy hasn't done some silly little act, just because he shouldn't do it? And so he says that he takes him out into the yard and he hangs him from a tree. Yeah. And he says he did it. While he's doing it, he's penning, looking back on the story. He says, one morning in cool blood, I slipped a noose about its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree, hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes and with a bitterest remorse at my heart, hung it because I knew that it had loved me and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense, hung it because I knew that in so doing I was committing a sin, a deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. So he knows what he's doing is wrong, but he hung it anyway. He committed the sin anyway. So that night, he's laying in bed, and he is aroused to a fire in the house, and the curtains of his bed are on fire, and the whole house is literally like going up in flames. And so he manages to escape. He and his wife and their servant, they leave, but everything in their house burns to the ground. They lose all their worldly possessions. And so he's trying to reckon with, this thing. A logical person would say, well, look what you've done. Like, this is penance. This is something God is doing to punish you. But he's not feeling that way because he's not feeling that guilt or that remorse for what he's done. So he goes back to the house to see the ruins. And while he's in there, everything is leveled to the ground with one exception. The wall behind his bed is completely still standing. And on the back, there is a burned shape that's shaped like a giant cat. And obviously, in our minds, we're thinking, oh yeah, that's God's way of trying to tell you, look what you did to that cat. This is what's happened to you as punishment. And so at first it kind of scares him, but then he tries to like reason it away in this wild justification. So he says that the cat had managed to be flung from the noose off the tree and thrown against the bedroom wall. And I mean, just wild. He's still not connecting that level of guilt and that level of his involvement and what he's done, his crime. So that was just really bizarre. So, okay. He stays drinking, obviously, because he's an alcoholic, and so he goes out every night. And he's drinking, and so one night in his bar crawl, he finds another cat, because that's exactly what he needs, is another animal to take on. So this cat looks a lot like his cat. It's black. It is looks, I mean, literally just like him. It's missing one of its eyes. But it has this big splotch of white, like on his chest. And so he knows it's not Pluto. So he takes it home. His wife falls in love with it. You know, they start the whole cycle all over again. He starts to dislike the cat, which kind of grows into his annoyance of the cat, which grows into avoidance of the cat. And the cat doesn't get the memo. Like, the cat is like, oh, you're my favorite person. So it's like always climbing on him and crawling around his legs. And it's obviously just bugging the crap out of him. So we can see where this is going, right? So one day he's trying to climb down the stairs, and the cat runs under his feet and almost throws him down the stairs like headlong. And so, of course, this is going to set our guy off. He picks up an axe and attempts to kill it, like with a swing at the axe, and his wife stops the blow, and she's like, oh, don't do that. That's awful, you horrible thing. And he's like, yeah, don't stop me. And so he takes the axe and like buries it in her brain and kills her. So that escalated really quickly. The cat skirts away in fear, obviously, as any sane thing would do. So what to do with the body? You know, he starts going through the list. He can't take it outside because people might see it. So, you know, what normally goes through our heads when we're trying to figure out what to do with a dead body. He's like, should I cut it up into tiny pieces and burn them? Should I throw it into the well in the yard? Should I pack it up in a box and ship it from the house? No, let's wall it up in the basement. So he does this. He walls it up in the basement. He starts looking for the cat. Can't find the cat. Obviously, the cat has gone far away from him and his axe. Days passed, and narrator is sleeping like a baby over what he's done. He's not even guilty. I soundly and tranquilly slept even with the burden of murder upon my soul. So the police show up about day 4, and they're like, yeah, we've got a call that your wife is missing, and no one's seen her in a couple of days. And he's like, well, she's not in the house. I don't know where she is, but y'all are free to look around. So he kind of like walks them around while they're digging and looking in every little crack and crevice. And he's tapping on walls and like, oh, you know, this solid handiwork, you know, you can't put a body back behind here. And so he's rapping on this wall, and all of a sudden there's a sound that comes from inside the wall, and he says it's a cry muffled and broken like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell. So the police are like, what the crap? And they start digging the wall up, and there's the dead body of his wife, and sitting on her head is the cat. It says, on its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. So we're coming kind of full circle, where he starts the story talking about, you know, he's there on death row. They're fixing to kill him for the murder of his wife, and we see it play out there at the end, which is why he's telling the story in the first place. So obviously we have a guy that is, I mean, hello, it's crazy, insane. Feelings of remorse, no feelings of remorse, no feelings of guilt. He's clearly a psychopath, a sociopath. Interestingly enough, even though he had multiple opportunities to kind of feel remorse or feel guilt, it only led to further violence and